Well, kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome to this consultation event about the future of the Wellington City Central Library. My name is Fleur Fitzsimons. I'm a City Councillor here in Wellington and I'll be guiding tonight's discussion. And I imagine it will be a very important, very engaging discussion, and I know that it will be very important because the discussions that we are having about the future of the Central Library building are important not only for people in Wellington today, but for people who are yet to be born and yet to move to our great city. So don't underestimate the importance of your contribution to this process and what we're going to hear tonight. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping tips. Everyone watching is on silent mode just to make this operate a bit more efficiently, but we would welcome your questions. So please do put them into the chat box, and after we've heard from our speakers, we'll get to your questions, and we hope we'll be able to have a bit of a useful discussion about the future of the Central Library building. We're also recording this webinar and a link will be emailed to you afterwards. So if you do need to leave early, you will get the link afterwards and hopefully you'll see your questions being answered then. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight we're very fortunate to have three very well respected members of our community, all of whom have devoted their lives to reading or libraries or books in different ways, and they'll share more about that this evening. They are Anne Goulding from Victoria University of Wellington. She is a Professor of Library and Information Management and has a research interest in the impact that libraries have on levels of literacy and learning within communities. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
Next we have Juliet Blyth, who is the Chief Executive of Read New Zealand, Tipu Muramura. Read New Zealand is the national agency dedicated to reading for pleasure and urging more New Zealanders to read. Juliet also has a history in running student bookshops here in Wellington and a real passion for books. She's also the chair of Booksellers New Zealand and sits on the Coalition for Books board. And finally, on the screen, we have Tūranga Central Library Manager at the Christchurch City Council, Chris Hay. Welcome, Chris. And as well as leading Christchurch's stunning new library, Chris has some experience here in Wellington. He was the manager of the Wellington City Libraries and Community Spaces. And he's also chair-elect for Public Libraries of New Zealand. So before we hear from them, I just wanted to set the scene very briefly about the importance of the discussion that we're having here tonight. We know that Wellingtonians are really missing our Central Library. It is a loved part of our city, and as a City Councillor, it is the thing that is raised most with me. What are you doing with the library? Get going with the library. And in terms of that, I do have the good news to share with you, and that is that City Councillors all around the table are united in wanting to see action happen with the future of the Central Library just as quickly as we possibly can, because we know that libraries are critical in connecting people and educating people and allowing people to go to safe, warm places where there's no pressure to buy and where you can just relax and read and engage. Our Central Library has been the living room of Wellington for so long and is such a vital part of our inner city. But unfortunately, the building just isn't safe to use. So now we have to talk about the ways to make it safe or how else we should ensure the future of the Central Library here in Wellington. And we really need your help. We need your help by making a submission, by getting in touch with us, by asking questions this evening. And really this is our chance and our opportunity to set the future progress and the future agenda for the Wellington City Library. And we genuinely need to hear from a wide range of members in the community. So please make a submission, encourage your children to make a submission, encourage your neighbours to make a submission. We genuinely want to hear from a cross-section of Wellington residents about what they want from the future of the Central Library. So we're going to hear from Anne, Juliet and Chris on their views about the Central Library and how we make sure that it supports our growing and changing city. And after they've all spoken, we will open it up to you. So as you hear from them, feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we'll make sure that we leave some time for them at the end.
Councillor, can you just ask people if they can hear? We've had 2 people say they can't, but everyone else is so far.
How will they say if they can?
If they could message us.
Can you anybody? Apparently we're having some problems with people hearing. So if you can hear, can you just message us to make sure that we know that some people can hear? Because otherwise we're only hearing from people who can't.
And we've got Shona who can, Bob can.
Yes, Shona and Bob, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Amy, awesome.
You guys are stars. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to start by inviting Anne from Victoria University of Wellington to share how libraries can positively change communities. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Fleur. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Fleur made a point there, and I think most of us gathered here this evening, whether we're in the room or virtually, we'd agree that the lack of a central library here in Wellington has left, a huge hole in our civic and cultural infrastructure. But I'm a kind of glass half full person, so I'd also say that now we have this great opportunity. We've got a really exciting opportunity to create a dynamic central library space, an environment that celebrates books and reading and exchange and engagement with information and ideas and learning. We've had decades, actually centuries of library development. And I think that practice has shown that libraries are actually very adaptable institutions. They've been swift to evolve and accommodate their community's changing needs and priorities. And, we know that those needs and priorities are very diverse, but we need the central library space to meet them all, and we can provide facilities to learn, to be inspired, to create increasingly, and this idea of experiencing new ideas and accessing technology. And of course, we mustn't forget as well that our central library can provide space for quiet contemplation as well. And I think one of the things I've already said is that, libraries above all are places for ideas. And a new library space needs to incorporate spaces within which people can engage with those ideas and with knowledge and information in a range of formats. Because increasingly we live in and work in blended spaces, I think. We move between the physical and the digital every day of our lives. And I think a good library design will incorporate that and facilitate that blending so that they complement one another and people can move, hopefully seamlessly, between the physical and the digital. We also hear quite a bit, I think, about how the digital is driving out the printed word. And I don't know if Juliet's going to have a little bit more to say about that. But I think research has demonstrated the durability of the printed word and printed books and printed information. And I think we realise that the distinction between print and digital is a false binary. They're not dichotomous. And in fact, I think libraries have realised that for years and years. And they, for a long time, have no longer considered them as separate propositions, but the same, but they're offering the same kinds of things, just in a different way. We're using different media. And the thing that they offer is access to, as I say, information, ideas, stories, and knowledge, and also opportunities for communities to share those, either among themselves or with each others. So facilitating that sharing and inspiring conversations around ideas and stories and information and knowledge, I think is another very important aspect for any new library space. So people need spaces, I think, as Fleur said there, where they can connect. And whether that's connecting with other people or connecting with ideas as well. So exploring and thinking and creating collectively as well as on their own. I think as well, we hear a lot about filter bubbles and echo chambers, and libraries can help with that as well. So opening up the people's eyes and ears to different opinions and different views, and supporting conversations around ideas too. So the library can support those, I think, by becoming this physical and digital space for collaboration and learning and creating and networking, so that Wellingtonians can connect with each other and with other people globally, and also with a world of knowledge too. Just changing focus slightly, you know, we have the prospect of hopefully a major new refurbishment or even a new building. That's to be decided, isn't it? And, you know, again, there's been quite a lot written about the symbolism of a central library and the iconography of a central library. And they're often presented as landmark buildings. And I'm sure Chris will be able to say more about that with his experiences at Tūranga, but this source of civic pride. But, you know, I think one of the most important messages that investment in a new, exciting central library space for Wellington will convey is that the city values its people. Yeah. So it's a way of saying, this is how we value you. This is what we think you're worth. We are giving you this wonderful new building filled with all the riches you can think of. So libraries can be ways in which, you know, the city values its people and demonstrates how it values its people as well. And I think that can be very empowering. So just to finish, I'd say that, you know, cities, communities need empowering spaces. And for me, and I'm sure many of you will agree because you're interested in this subject, but for me, there's little more empowering than a library. It opens up a world of opportunity and imagination and enrichment, and can really add to the quality of life of the city.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. What a fabulously energetic start. That's wonderful. And I know many people will be relieved to hear you say that books aren't going anywhere because so many people get in touch about that. But yeah, thank you. And look, if that sparks some questions for you, please do pop them in the chat box. Now I'd like to introduce Juliet Blyth. Juliet's going to talk about modern libraries and also the importance of the independent arts within a library. So yeah, over to you, Juliet.
Thank you, Fleur. Kia ora koutou. Yeah, we Read NZ, we're advocates for reading, so I'm really coming from a reading perspective. Reading for pleasure is one of the most accessible and affordable arts activities, and its benefits are well documented. OECD research shows that reading for pleasure is the single most important indicator of a child's future success. It's an even more powerful factor in life achievement than socioeconomic background. We also know the contribution reading makes to our mental well-being, to building empathy, and to cross-cultural understanding. And whilst the work that we do at Read NZ is focused on children, our next generation of readers and writers, we want to support all New Zealanders to experience the joys and benefits of reading for pleasure. To that end, our public libraries are an essential conduit in supporting the importance of reading as a cultural practice and in providing access for all communities to reading resources. My own experience as a young mother is that the Wellington Central Library was my living room, and as Fleur rightly said, we went to check out books, but actually we went because we could go there without judgment. We didn't have to spend any money. We could stay as long as we liked. No one asked why we were there, and I felt like it was a place to me. So I have a really personal connection and sense of ownership to the Central Library, and I'm sad for the families at the moment who can't have those experiences, although of course the pop-ups and the suburban libraries are doing wonderful jobs. For future generations to be able to be confident, good, wide-ranging and intelligent readers, we need to prioritise reading. It needs to be at the centre of life and education. For that to happen, we all need to take responsibility for growing a reading culture. We can't just leave it to our teachers and educators. We as parents, grandparents and whānau need to model reading. We need to be seen not just reading, but enjoying reading. Our central library has a role to play to support all readers, but especially young readers and their whānau, to read for pleasure and to keep reading. Good reading habits taught early remain for life. A new report by the Ministry of Education's Chief Education Science Advisor, Professor Stuart McNaughton, The Literacy Landscape in Aotearoa, New Zealand, says growing numbers are simply turning off reading. More than half of our 15-year-olds now agree that I only read if I have to. And even worse, 28% agree that for me, reading is a waste of time. It's easy to keep children reading when they're young, it's fun and it's social. As children get older, the focus on reading can change from fun to duty, as books prescribed to be read in class are dissected, themes discussed at length, and essays to demonstrate comprehension required. Reading can become less fun too, because well-meaning adults and influential peers can become prescriptive about what is okay to read and what is not. Illustrated books may be perceived as babyish, graphic novels too easy. It's harder for young people, especially reluctant readers, to feel okay about what they want to read. Professor McNaughton's report also touched on another reason children are turning away from reading, the need to see themselves in the books they're reading. By year 8, 27% of boys and 23% of girls disagree that the things we read in class are about people like me and my family. We need more books and other reading materials that are relevant to children's lives. By that same token, in order for young people to feel like they belong not just on the page, but also at the library, they need to see themselves there, other young people and library staff reflecting their experience and cultural backgrounds. The role of the library and the librarians is to create a space where young adult readers can safely make reading choices that encourage them to read more and to read widely. Reading is an individual and a social activity, and libraries can facilitate spaces to cater to both kinds of reading. Libraries can provide the opportunity to read and to share the reading experience, providing easy access to books, book events and activities for community and cultural groups. There's a growing body of literature about the impact of digital learning on children's ability to comprehend and retain information when reading digitally. It's not, I believe, the library's role to dictate how readers should read, but to meet the reader where they have the highest chance of engagement. That means providing resources in a multiplicity of formats. My excitement and wish for a new library for Wellington City is that it continues to hold the reader at its heart, that it is for everyone, and that the communities of our city all have a place there where they can see themselves on the pages they are reading, where the books are in the languages they connect with, where the library staff reflect the customers, where it's okay to read anything, where the library can provide access and through that opportunity to worlds they may otherwise not encounter.
Oh, thank you, Juliet. What a wonderful defence of reading. And it's, yeah, you certainly made the case for reading. And I think putting libraries at the heart of that is really part of what this whole discussion is about. So thank you so much. I'd now like to pass over to Chris Hay, who has probably one of the best jobs in libraries in New Zealand, head of Tūranga, the Christchurch City Council Library, and he's going to talk to us about what Tūranga's done in Christchurch, because I know I haven't been there, but I've heard from so many people about its the love that people in Christchurch have for it and the way that it's really changing the view of libraries. So thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Fleur. I feel like I sort of left my heart in Wellington, actually. I worked for Wellington City Libraries for over 20 years, firstly looking after libraries across those southeastern suburbs from about Miramar to Brooklyn, and then I was, as Fleur said earlier, as the manager from 2016 to 2018. But I moved to Christchurch 2 years ago, and as Fleur said, currently looking after the team at Tūranga, which is our new central library. I thought I'd just start by talking about the role that public libraries can play in our cities. Libraries have always been about communities kind of pooling their resources to enable literacy and access to knowledge. And those principles that sit behind this are fairness and opportunity and access of information for all. So those principles kind of still apply today, not just through the opportunity to access books and information, but also different media, new technologies, and learning opportunities. The physical buildings that provide the environment to enable these opportunities are important, but so too is the staff expertise that's really crucial to facilitate the whole experience. So libraries these days focus on a broader set of literacies than perhaps some people realise. Sure, we are definitely about that functional literacy, that ability to read and enjoy reading, and that's underpinning further learning in life. We're also about information literacy and increasingly, helping people find that ability to find trustworthy information that's true. We can be about digital or technological literacy, using technology as a tool to achieve things. We're also about civic literacy, libraries as a connection point between the government or local government and citizens. Libraries can be about community literacy, libraries offering spaces and events to build cohesive communities. And, often in a time where we're shouting at each other on social media, these places where you can come face to face to have these connections, they kind of oil the wheels of society. And also cultural literacy, understanding one's own culture better and understanding others' cultures better as well. Second role libraries can play in 21st century New Zealand is fostering creativity. We can really play a role in helping people to meet their potential so they can be their best selves and so they can contribute economically. And so, yeah, tonight's a really good opportunity just to share a few quick examples from my own workplace, Tūranga. Along with about 200,000 books here, Christchurch City Council has invested in a makerspace, in teaching and facilitation spaces, and a media studio. The makerspace has computers with design software that would realistically be prohibitively expensive for some people. We have laser cutter, we have 3D printers, we have sewing machines and overlockers, we have a vinyl printer. But crucially, we're also well staffed with a skilled and experienced team who are dedicated to facilitating our customers, our users, access and learning. And we get people designing prototypes. One customer last year designed and fabricated a prototype remote control robot, and he's now set up a small business videoing home foundations for earthquake repairs. Another customer used our library design software and PCs to design a board game and then fabricated the pieces, the box, even the graphics that go on the car before taking that prototype to market. Our media studio has young people recording rap or their own compositions. We have adults recording family history, lots of different diverse uses. So a library can facilitate that step up. We're not about taking over from the private sector here, but we're definitely filling a gap and providing opportunity for all. The third role I think libraries can play, and most definitely in Christchurch, are as urban activators. We're part of the urban fabric in our cities. And I'll start by admitting I've been 2 and a bit years away from Wellington, but I certainly recall how busy your central library was with over 3,000 people visiting every day. And it was a factor in the activation of that civic square end of central Wellington, generating the foot traffic, giving people one more reason to come into the city. And there were obvious benefits for the neighbouring shops and the hospitality providers. So if you look at Tūranga here in Christchurch, this library serves the same function. It has a really crucial role in my new home city. We're located on the northern side of Cathedral Square. We're on the edge of the still being developed Performing Arts Precinct, and we were an anchor project for the Central Christchurch rebuild. Tūranga is an activator for our central city. We're certainly nowhere near your 3,000 customers in the door a day yet, but we are a destination for locals coming from all over central Canterbury and from further afield. Tūranga provides one more reason for locals to come into an increasingly vibrant central Christchurch. And we're a destination, especially on weekends, alongside the Margaret Mahi Playground, the Riverside Market, the Christchurch Art Gallery, the Canterbury Museum, and so on. So just to quickly sum up, libraries are most certainly about physical buildings, the spaces where people can come together and gather and study and connect and read. But I would encourage you to think beyond that in Wellington. Libraries are also about fostering those various literacies I talked about. They're about creative opportunity, and they're about an institution's place in the vibrant urban environment. So with my heart in Christchurch and in Wellington, I'd say consider those various aims if you are making a public submission. Consider those aims in your decision making. Yes, the physical building is important, but I guess think about those roles around literacies and opportunity and urban activation that a successful, well-supported, innovative public library can offer a community, because those are the things that really matter. Thank you.
Oh, and thanks, Chris. That was a fascinating insight into Tūranga, and I really like this idea of libraries as urban activators, and that's something we've really got to think about in Wellington, especially with what's happening with Civic Square. And we might just come to a question around that, which has come in around how you would imagine the Central Library balancing that need to create quiet spaces, but also connection to the library collection, but also to Tinako Civic Square in the city. And it is about that sort of urban activators point you made, Chris. So, yeah, do you want to start with you, Juliet, maybe on that?
Well, I guess thinking back to the Central Library as it was, I felt that it managed pretty well, actually, the needs for different spaces. And I think it's also about creating an expectation from the user's perspective that libraries are not the quiet places that they used to be, that they are places for people to be able to be themselves and to talk and to have discussions, whilst also, and that's the job of a good architect, right, is to be able to create those spaces within spaces where people can be together. They can be alone but together. Yeah, I think that the whole architecture and design thing is obviously really key and really important.
And what do you
I'd
see?
support that around the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
There you go.
Architects. Yeah, you have to balance the needs of the various users, but architects are there to help engineer some of these solutions to challenging issues. Yes, libraries can be quite noisy places, but I actually think shh is okay in some areas of libraries. When they were doing the consultation well before I was in this role with the Christchurch community, you know, people wanted a really broad range of things out of their new central library. Some people wanted the ability, many people wanted the ability to come somewhere where you can study, where you can reflect. They've engineered that in terms of, you know, white noise that acts like noise cancelling earphones do. We've got a room here which is called the Quiet Place, and it's completely self-policing, and it's a lovely quiet study space. But alongside that, balancing that with zones where you can come together for a performance or you know, 100 school kids. We've got 100 kids from a Summerfield school coming in here tomorrow and into one of our spaces, and, you know, encouraging those various uses. Architects can certainly help with that.
Just picking up on Juliet's point there about expectations, because you can have zoning as you mentioned, Chris. So you can have zoning by space, but you could also have zoning by time. And you know that at 10 o'clock in your local community library, it's going to be a busy time, isn't it? And obviously the city library has more scope because it's a bigger space, and you can lose yourself maybe on an upper floor when something noisy is going on one of the lower floors. But I think you know the point of quiet space is very important, and I think especially in a central library, because it is a bit of a refuge as well from the busy city outside, you know, and you've done your shopping and you just want a quiet sit down and space. And you know, we talk about hotspots, don't we, and Wi-Fi hotspots, but it's also quite nice to have cold spots. It's quite nice to have, you know, where there's no technology and you can just sit and think, and whether it's on a nice sofa. And I don't know if it's possible to personalize spaces, so you know, to have quiet spaces that people can personalize, whether it's the lighting or the furniture, and to make them comfortable for themselves.
Sort of consistent with that theme, another question's come through, and maybe we'll start with you, Chris, and it's really about whether adult education classes should be hosted at the Central Library. And I know as councillors, we've discussed the possible co-location of Capital E as an obvious partnership within the library. But what's your thinking around adult education classes being hosted at a Central Library, Chris?
I think there's a place for it. We also walk a fine line between, a public library service funded through your rates and an education service funded through Vote Education. And so you do have to walk that line quite carefully. But what we can offer in libraries is, well, certainly what we're offering here in Tūranga is access to spaces that partners can come in and use. And so quite a lot of the services and programs and activities we're offering here, my team aren't delivering them, our teams aren't delivering them. They might be facilitating them, enabling them, connecting, but it might be a third party delivering. Having said that, we've got a local organisation called Imagination Station who deliver, they started off offering access to Lego for young people, and now it's morphed into much more than that. They're a formal partner, so they actually have a space in Tūranga, but they're also running robotics classes and programming classes for all ages. So there's certainly a place for that, and it may be with librarians running it, or it may be with partners running it.
Because we do have, public libraries do a lot of informal learning, certainly, and there's the digital skills, for example, upskilling people, and whether that's on a formal basis in a workshop or class type situation, often with external providers, as Chris was saying, or whether it's just somebody coming in and saying, how do I use this? So there's a lot of that informal learning going on, I think, as well. Yeah.
Juliet, did you want to comment on that?
I think Chris's ideas around or what they do in Tūranga with the facilitating spaces for other people to use, it sounds really good.
So I think it's building those partnerships, isn't it? And building those relationships. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. We've got another question that's come through, and this is a big discussion we're having in Wellington at the moment, is how do we accommodate increasing numbers of people who we know are going to come and live here? And I guess I'm interested, there's a question around how you see a future central library supporting the growth of a city, particularly here within the inner city. Do you want to comment on that, Anne?
Yeah, I think that, I saw that question, and I like the emphasis on growth, because it's, we think of, when we're thinking of perhaps the new or refurbished central library, and we've got the timelines and we've got the costs. So instead of thinking about it as a cost, we should think about it as an investment, I think, because it's, an investment in the people of the city as well. Yeah, I mean, Chris has mentioned some of this already, I think, supporting local businesses and those kind of ripple-on effects or flow-on effects from people coming to the city. I think there's also a role in supporting the sort of creative economy as well, and the culture there. So it's difficult because many of the benefits of a library are sort of the public good, and they're difficult to pin down and to quantify. But I think you can do that. I mean, there have been studies of the return on investment, for example, of libraries, and usually they come out very well in that. So yeah.
And Chris, just thinking about Tūranga, is it kind of set up to accommodate growth that is coming to Christchurch in a way?
Yeah, our population here is larger than it was before the quake, so there has been an awful lot of growth in the last sort of 5-6 years in particular. I get a sense that Tūranga was definitely built with future inner city growth in mind. So just in terms of the urban form, obviously after the quakes, a lot of office space moved out to the outer parts of the city, and so we had this sort of donut city effect. As the inner city is being rebuilt, Sparks just opened a building across the way here with 400 or 500 staff in here. Suddenly those inner city workers are coming back into town, and obviously with the blueprint for the central city, there's a lot of apartments and inner city townhouses being built as well. So we're serving kind of a role as a local neighbourhood library for our central city, and a city library and a regional role. You know, we're also, you know, we have an archiving and local history, Māori history, family history role here, and some really strong collections, and you know, a role in providing access to a regionally or South Island wide important collection. So yeah, both a neighbourhood library and a central library, and that's an interesting line to walk.
And Juliet, it really resonated with me when you talked about the role of the Central Library when you were a mum with new babies. Because I know I took my babies to Baby Rock and Rhyme at the Central Library every single week. And it was not only an amazing chance to connect with other mums, but they taught me how to kind of sing songs in a way and link with books, and it was just lovely. So I do think, you know, there is that role of, if we're going to grow our city and attract more families to live in the CBD, we really do need to have that Central Library accommodating that.
I completely agree, and particularly when you have small babies, things like that can become a fixture in your week, and sometimes that's the thing you're clinging on to get you through that day, where for 10 or 20 minutes someone else is entertaining your child, and you can just look back and actually enjoy your child. You know, that's huge. I think that we need to understand where the growth is coming from, and as Chris says, I suppose that potentially means that's more people living in the city, and what are their needs on an everyday basis? Does the library need to be opened later? Is there an opportunity for there to be sort of more cultural events in the evenings that connects all the different sort of sectors of the arts, not just literature, but music and all those sorts of things as well, versus how is the library used at the weekend when that's families coming in maybe together and they're going to go to Capital E and the gallery and all those other cool things that happen in Christchurch. Considering the different kinds of visitors and at what time they're coming, I think is really important.
Prior to COVID, we were really full with visitors from around the world. You know, we were on the cruise ship bus tours kind of route and things like that. But equally, you know, if you were a student in a pokey, freezing cold Christchurch flat in the middle of winter, coming here to study in the evening is really important. What you were saying, Juliet, resonated with me because, I mean, my girls are 12 and 14 now, but when they were younger and we were in Wellington, you know, a Saturday morning we would be at Central Library for story time or Te Papa. Tūranga is definitely filling that role for Christchurch families down here. Saturday and Sunday are by far our busiest days, and it's family hangout space.
And actually, there was a point you made when we had that preliminary discussion on Friday, Chris, that I thought was quite interesting as well. It's that kind of low barriers to participation, and you talked about how people came in maybe initially just to look around, and then they came back, and then maybe they came back again, and then maybe they became members, and so I think that's a very important aspect as well.
And you know, we're very good at I guess preaching to our converted. We're very good at making sure that we look after the people who are already highly engaged and they're very loyal users, and we should look after them. But what's probably excited me the most is young Māori and Pacifica kids coming in and seeing a recording studio and getting excited. They don't have to join, they don't have to get a library card, but you might find that that's a connection point for young kids who just don't feel that maybe that's been a place for them in the past. We're about to kick off some esports events here, where again we will most likely attract a really different demographic from the sort of white middle class big readers that you might expect a core to library clientele.
Actually, we know in Wellington as well that high school students have been really missing the Central Library because it was a place they went to after school. But the other group is homeless people, and we've got a question here around homeless people using the library to nap and relax, and it's sort of trying to talk about what other homeless outreach the Central Library can do. I know there are a few programs that our libraries do offer in this space, but Anne, do you have any kind of comments around?
Because, I mean, I know that Auckland's have been doing quite a lot of work in this space as well, and I'm not sure libraries have quite worked out their role in this regard, and I think that's fair enough, because it's quite a recent development and a recent consideration, maybe. And I know there's been quite a lot of work in the States around this as well. So yeah, it is a role that they can play, but there needs to be, I think, more work around what the expectations are again, and what exactly libraries can do in that space. Yeah.
Juliet or Chris?
We've got a community liaison specialist, so a full-time role that was established as part of opening Tūranga, and she comes not from a library background. She came in from sort of social services sector. She's connected to local agencies, be they the city mission or accommodation providers or care services. But even more importantly, she knows our regulars by name, and we would have sort of 30 to 50 folks who may be in and out of sort of, they may have accommodation over their head or they may not. And so just having someone whose role is dedicated to looking after a absolutely legitimate set of customers, set of library users who deserve, this is a democratic space and they deserve that access and that care just as much as anybody else. That's been hugely helpful for me. I certainly, it was a factor we were often challenged with in my old role. So it's lovely to have that liaison specialist here.
Yeah, and I think, again, you highlight the importance of those partnerships there, don't you, and the collaboration. So connecting people, having those connections and connecting people with necessary medical or housing or, social services.
If someone's in a bad way, she can have a quick phone call to the relevant person and there's a little bit of a heads up. It's, without impinging on folks' privacy, you certainly can, that's a community thing.
Yeah.
So we've got a few more questions here that are sort of getting into the crunchy decisions facing our city. This one is interesting. It says that the Central Library seemed like its face was turned away from Tūranga Civic Square, and they're asking whether it could be better opened up and turned out to the square, similar to Tūranga. Do you have a thought on that, Juliet?
Honestly, I don't have a firm thought on that, but it sounds really sensible to be facing into if there's going to be other activated edges.
Yeah,
that sounds like a really
so
nice
it doesn't connect that well with the
no,
with
it'd be good if there was a connection, and whether that's an open space, where people can sit out, if we on a non-windy day, that people can sit outside and enjoy the civic square as well. So it's the extension of the library outside, and I think that's also important again in lowering barriers to library use. That those sort of chance encounters and saying, there are people like me sitting in the library, so that transparency is quite important.
And maybe having multiple entry places, so that you can just sort of slide on in. You don't have to walk past someone who's sort of going to, I know greeting is really great, but I also think maybe for some people greeting is has the opposite unintended effect.
Because we're just talking really about the point you made earlier about urban activator and libraries acting as that. There was a question raised about the Central Library sort of turning its face away from Tūranga Civic Square. It could be opened up, and this person said that would be similar to Tūranga. Is it? Can you tell us about how that works in the urban form?
I think it's it makes the place permeable in a really good way. I think 1992, 91, when Wellington Central Library was designed, you had a different focus. It was on protecting the collections, and so a big part of that one way in, one way out is just collection security. Technology, the work of the architect can help where you've got taonga, where you've got stuff that is really precious, but I think in my experience with Tūranga, we see folks just coming through from one side of the building to the other, and they might stop. They might have that sort of serendipity moment where they discover a book on the new arrivals stand and decide to borrow it. They might engage with a staff presentation or an event that's happening on the ground floor. They might stop in the cafe. But yeah, what have we got? We've got about 6 doors in and out of this place on our ground floor. Also, just while we're talking about sort of the architecture of this library, our ground floor, He Hononga, is it's like an orientation space. We don't have a huge collection here. We have our magazines, our serials, but we have a lot of spaces where you can hang out. You can do a jigsaw. We might have the robotics on display for people to play with. We have the cafe. We offer a taster of what's happening elsewhere in the building, but also a lot of space for people just to be.
Yeah.
I've also had a question, this is an interesting one, around Te Awe, and I think, you know, there is a series of pop-up libraries that we've put in place, and this person asks, given the proposed cost of a new central library of 200 million, has anyone considered other smaller libraries around the city rather than one big single one? And I guess that this consultation is envisaging one big central library, but I guess it'd be interesting to get your perspective on the importance of that versus this kind of idea about having a series of smaller ones.
I think a city needs a central library, you know, a good central library, well designed, and it's also about the size of the collection. And although we do talk about moving away from a collection oriented service to more programmatic and engagement, you know, the collection is important, and it's still, you know, the heart of the library. And so I think having space for a good collection where you can encounter books and information on all kinds of different topics and subjects, and a good range of those, I think that's still really important.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential. I think the scale of a large building with more in it than you could ever read is aspirational and exciting, and it's sort of worlds of possibility, and that's what I really miss about the Central Library, and the anonymity of it, of being, you know, sometimes you do want people to recognise you, but sometimes you don't, and you just want to go and do your thing, and I just really miss that about the Central Library.
And I think as well, it supports, you know, another important aspect of any library, but especially a central library, is this kind of multi-generational aspect. You know, I think there are very few public spaces that have the range of users that a good central library, a public library will have, and I think that's to maintain that is really important. Yeah.
Chris, I imagine you're a supporter of the one central library concept.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent a bit of time in some of your temporary libraries when I've been up there recently, and it's, you know, you've certainly done some amazing things in a short period of time to enable that service continuity. However, a central library, I mean, some of the stuff I was talking about, not just as a place where you can access collections, which is, as Anne said, you know, that's still the core of what we're about, or accessing information, but a central place so people can come to, that you don't have to pay, that's neither the home nor the commercial, somewhere in between, a source of civic pride. You know, when I worked there, the people from out of town who'd go, oh, that's that amazing building with the Nikau palm, you know, palms. There's something about the big institution, the big central library, which I think for a capital city or any of our 3 or 4 largest cities is quite important. I mean, I wouldn't want to have to make that financial decision, and you know, and that's why there are a range of options for you folks to consider. But I think there's definitely a place for a central library.
Cool, and we've just got one final question here. There was a cafe, a very loved cafe, that opened to Civic Square, and you could enter the library that way. Many people will remember that. And this person's asking, talking about the other side facing the city, and many people came from that side as well. And was that balance enough? And I think it does go a bit to your point, Juliet, around having, you know, you don't have to have this confronting entrance that you sort of, everybody knows you've arrived in, that sometimes you might just want to go in different ways. And
and as I say, I think those sort of chance encounters, so somebody wandering through the city, suddenly comes upon the library and can just have a quick wander around. You know, I think you want to have that, as Chris was saying, that sort of permeability. The interchange between the city and the library, I think, is really important. Yeah, I agree. And another important thing, I think, is to actually reflect the city in the library. So I think, you know, Tūranga has done that well. So the city's reflected in the library, and from the library you can look out at the city, and I think that connection is really important too. But that's down to the architecture. I'm not an architect. I wouldn't know how to do that.
Well, it's just about time to wrap up, but I thought I'd get a sort of final comment from each of you. Anything that particularly struck you about the discussion, or anything that you think is particularly important for Wellington Central Library, and what you think we need to take into account, particularly given this is Wellington, the capital city's Central Library. So perhaps starting with you, Chris.
Tricky one. I would really probably just refocus again, as I said, on the fact that, yes, obviously this is a discussion about a really gnarly decision that Wellington City Councillors need to make around a physical building, but think about what's happening in those buildings, the literacies I talked about, the sense of building community and civic literacy and basic functional literacy. So the 4-year-old knows which way to hold up a picture book. Think about the creative opportunity, the levelling, the social levelling that it can provide, and think about the institution's place in that vibrant urban environment, the library as an activator for the neighbourhood around it.
Anne, final comment from you.
I think, you know, think about what's happening in the library, but also think about what's happening in the city. And I think the library has to align with the social context and the cultural context, and you know, the physical context of the library as well. And and in a growing city, to provide those spaces that people can come. If they don't have space at home, or it's noisy at home, or they want a bigger space and they want to spread out, to provide those kinds of spaces, I think is important in an increasingly busy and crowded city.
I just had a thought when we were speaking earlier about sort of the social responsibility of the library and what kind of spaces the library creates and who are they for and who's using them. And I just was sort of thinking also about loneliness and how lots of people through our entire society experience loneliness from time to time, and I sort of view the library as a place to come and to be and to almost participate in the life of the library without having to have a connection to those people there, to watch and observe, and you know, to watch the kids having story time, to reconnect with pieces of your life that maybe you lost. And I think that's a really valuable and a really important role that the library can play too. And I guess just really echoing these guys, and just really like the library has to be for everybody, and everybody has to feel that they can go in there whenever they want to, and that's just so important.
Well, excellent. Well, we have heard so many things about libraries and so many things about the value of libraries, and it's we've heard about them as being critical to democracy, as being a sort of response to fake news. It's almost like libraries are the solution to all the world's problems, and in a way they actually are, you know. But I think this is the challenge, that everybody knows libraries are inherently good, but yet we still do need to keep defending them and promoting them and advancing the idea, or the quite radical idea of libraries in our cities. So just want to thank those who've been watching us this evening, and thank you for your questions. And this isn't the end of your chance to ask questions. The council officers, Lucy and Debbie, who are here this evening, but also many others, have put so much time and effort into this consultation, and also into answering the many questions that people have raised. And the council has taken a very open approach to the information that we have on the Central Library. So The website is full of reports. You can read till your heart's content about the engineering problems facing the building and the challenges that we're facing, but also the consultation document goes into a lot of detail about the various options for the future of the Central Library building. We had a session on Friday, which the Mayor Andy Foster chaired. That was from library, literature and research experts, and they sort of discussed reimagining the Central Library collections and spaces and how they could reflect the past and the future and create space for everyone, and that'll be going up online as well. And on Wednesday, there's another event where you can hear from one of the engineers talking about why the building closed, why we needed to close it, and also the engineering challenge to restoring the library service. And as I said earlier, you will be sent a link to the video of tonight's event. So if these people made a point that you didn't capture and you really wanted to, you can go back and watch that. And we'll be spreading that on social media. So please do encourage your friends and whānau to follow that. But most importantly, please put in a submission, and please encourage whoever you know that cares about the future of the Central Library to put in a submission as well. They are due on Monday the 7th of September by 5 p.m. So submissions again due Monday the 7th of September at 5 p.m. And you can find out more about how to make a submission on the Wellington City Council website. If you look at www.letstalk.wellington.govt.nz, you'll see information there and you can make a submission, or else you can go into any one of the Wellington City Council libraries and get a yellow booklet, and that's how you make a submission. And lots of people are actually taking the opportunity to get the booklet and to write out the submission. So whatever works for you, please make a submission. We really, really need to hear from as many people so that we're best placed to make the best decision about the future of our Central Library. So just finally, thanks Juliet, thanks Anne, thanks Chris, thanks to the council officers for all your work behind the scenes, and thank you all for watching. And yeah, please do make a submission. We need your voice. Ka kite. You guys were excellent. Thank you. You're really good. You had so much.